It's quite telling that during the pandemic, I'm actually able to connect with all of you, and I wasn't able to visit you yet in California. So anyway, thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure. So I'm signing in, and I'm sharing my screen now from my office in Dubai. As you know, it's pretty hot already in Dubai. It's about 40 degrees Celsius, and it will remain so for the next 3 months. So keep that in mind, you know, the heat that we actually live with, because this has an impact, of course, on lifestyle and mobility. So a little bit of history, because, you know, cities and communities and case studies, they don't parachute down. So the sustainable city is actually the result, the outcome of very diligent research, which was triggered by the global financial crisis of 2008, when we, diamond developers, realized that we had to approach the construction industry in a different manner. We were very conscious of the carbon footprint of what we do as developers or construction. And so we actually embarked on a global journey during the recession 10 years ago to learn from around the world. And we actually identified a number of interesting communities. And that journey initially took us to the University of California in Davis. So that's on the left on the slide, where we discovered the plans that were ongoing and the commitment to social sustainability and community building. And then we also visited Fujisawa in Japan, which was all about being smart and solar. Freiburg, Sonnebo in Denmark, about zero waste. Eden Project is about mimicking ecosystems inside a temperature-controlled structure or biodome. And Masdar City in Abu Dhabi, which is only 120 kilometers south of where I am today. And great lessons, many strands of sustainability, which we actually wanted to harness and synthesize. At the same time, the opening, which was made possible with the University of California, led to a multi-year research collaboration. And I believe my colleague Saad Joseph is going to explain much more about it. Suffice it to say that this was a golden opportunity for us as a developer, and hopefully for the coalition of universities to work together to come to push the boundaries of sustainability, to explore sustainability in all its facets, including social, environmental, and economic. So it's been a privilege to work with the network, and my colleague, Dr. Tim Rogmans, who might be listening with us today, was part of that journey, and I joined about 3 years ago. So this has been a wonderful experience, and hopefully more of this to come with other developers as well. And this is such a positive picture of that group, and all the chancellors, and Saad Joseph is there, and our CEO, Faris Saeed. All of them are in that picture in the Sustainable City in October of 2015. All of this learning and research resulted in a master plan, which was announced in 2013. The development we're looking at is 46 hectares, or 460,000 square meters. Some metrics on the right side, I think these are important numbers. We have become a destination for sustainability learning. 10,000 people walk into the community every year. We have received more than 35 industry awards. Last year, we achieved a 92% occupancy. We've created jobs in the community, so it is about economic growth and development. And we've also achieved a remarkable energy use intensity of 95 kilowatt hour per square meter per year, which is about 1/3 of the average EUI in Dubai. And the master plan is about residential clusters, 500 villas, there's an urban farm, there is an autism village, a buffer zone, bioswales, sports facilities, a mixed-use development, apartments, a mosque, a school, an equestrian club, the Sea Institute, and holiday homes under construction. All of that in one space. And our approach from the very beginning has been to follow and embrace the 3 pillars of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic sustainability. You're looking at an aerial view of the Sustainable City, which is about 1 year old. I'm just going to zoom in on environmental sustainability. And specifically, when we address as a developers environmental sustainability, we believe that we can influence food production, food security, energy management, water management, building materials, including life cycle analysis and embodied carbon, mobility, which I have circled in yellow, and waste management. So I'm gonna, actually in the interest of time, I'm just gonna show you 2 slides on mobility to set perhaps the stage for the rest of this great webinar. And so for us, our approach to mobility from day one has been to promote and facilitate sustainable mobility solutions. Walkability is number 1. Despite the heat, there are so many things that we can do to improve the microclimate. It is also about facilitating or accommodating micro-mobility. We've deployed a buggy sharing system to commute inside of the city. It is about being ready for electrification and smart charging, and it is also about driverless shuttle. These are some pictures just to summarize those verticals. So on the left side, you see people, and it is a community for people, and that's why it is so pedestrian friendly or people friendly. You have push carts, you have buggies, you have bicycles, you have prams throughout the community and throughout those cycling and jogging tracks that we have, and shaded streets, sikas. In the middle, you see that yes, we are EV ready. We also provided a cash subsidy to early adopters in the amount of $10,000 US towards the purchase of their electric vehicle. Some homeowners availed this benefit. We have charging stations. We're now moving into load balancing, and we also participated in many electrical vehicle road trips and provided seminars and conferences. On the right side, you see the buggies. We have 60 buggies deployed across the community. They are geofenced, speed limited. They offer live tracking, and there is a certain allowance per household because we do not want people to abuse the benefit or the asset. And this slide shows you what is in the works or in the pipeline. So on the left side, yes, we had a 6-month pilot project with the Roads and Transport Authority to test a driverless shuttle around the community along a fixed route of 1.4 kilometers. It was also speed limited, and we had a dedicated charging station, and all the lessons that came from that pilot. In the middle is something that is still ongoing, and Dr. Giovanni's team have provided a lot of the groundwork to make this happen. This is an agreement we have with Chevrolet for their EV Bolts. We have acquired 6. We wish to deploy them for the residents on an exclusive basis as an EV sharing program within the community. I mean, for the residents of the community. And on the right side, well, I think all cities around the world are being faced with a deluge of scooters, and how to manage those scooters. The pros and cons of scooters and micromobility is also something in regulating versus deregulating scooters in planned communities. I summarize with this slide, and this is just to show you that we have a commitment to knowledge sharing, knowledge development, and education. And so we have a 560 square meter premise in the sustainable city called Mindspace. And in that Mindspace, we have a mobility pod. And so this pod has such a mural, and the mural summarizes our approach to smarter mobility, from micromobility to video conferencing, which is what we're doing today. That's the bottom left corner. And then to car sharing, electrification, and autonomous, with all the benefits and the opportunities. I conclude with who we are. As an institute, Diamond Developers established the C Institute several years ago to promote knowledge and practices in sustainability. We are really positioned to support the goals of the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We have a mandate across 4 programs: research, training, business incubation, events, and conferences. This is the building that is currently undergoing a permit, because we're now commencing the construction phase. We are aiming for 0 carbon certification by the International Living Future Institute, which is based in the US. And we're also looking at cradle-to-cradle solutions for certain spaces and volumes within that institute, which provides auditoriums and classrooms and multi-purpose halls and lecture halls. So this is really a place to be in the future for sustainability knowledge. And I conclude with this slide, which is all about partnerships. You know, all of this cannot happen in isolation. We firmly believe in collaboration locally and globally with government entities, academia, and professional organizations, most recently New Cities Foundation, which is also based in the US. And I conclude, and I think my 5 or 6 minutes are up.
Thank you very much, Karim. We would like to move now from Dubai to Davis, California. So Karim was giving an overview of what the sustainable city is and what are the principles of sustainability and how they've been deployed in several different areas and with all the efforts done in the sustainable city in Dubai. And now we're moving to California, where Suad Joseph has been leading a multi-year research program at the University of California, Davis, in collaboration with several different partners to really help the sustainable city evaluate the sustainability efforts that are being done there and also work together with the experts and the researchers in the sustainable city to further promote a culture of sustainability and new additional strategies to further improve the possibility to achieve this goal. And so, Suad, you want to give us an overview of this program?
Yes, thank you, Giovanni, for inviting me, and thank you, Leon and Natalie, for all of your technology work to keep us all together. The research for this mobility project in the sustainable city was funded by the Sustainability Research and Training Program, we call it SRTP, of the University of California Davis Arab Region Consortium, which we call UCDAR. Professor Ciceli asked me to give a little background on both the SRTP and the UCDAR. So I'll start with SRTP. The Sustainability Research and Training Program was launched in 2014 as an agreement between the University of California, Davis and Diamond Developers. And the purpose was to carry out research to support the development, building, and maintenance of the sustainable city in Dubai. The focus was on water, soil, air, energy, food production, solid waste management, and also the social conditions for producing and living in sustainable communities. The total contract was $2.97 million, of which $1.75 million was dedicated for direct research projects. We did 3 annual rounds of applications, and we funded 9 projects over the 3-year cycle of active funding. We set a ceiling of $150,000 per proposal, although one project did get it $350,000. The projects were supposed to be all interdisciplinary, collaborative projects, bringing together scholars from all or as many of the partners of the UCDAR consortium as possible. So here, if I can give you, can we share screens here now? Do you need me to do the share screen on mine? Okay. I need to. Okay. Can you see the Sustainability Research and Training Program on your screen? Giovanni, can you see it?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So
yes, we can see it.
Right, and I think Leon is going to put the URL on the chat so you can see it also. So I would direct you to the web page, my web page here, and here are the 9 projects that got funded. It's quite an impressive list. One of the projects is on hybrid solar, another on novel water technology, another project on biomass, a project on anaerobic digestion, a project on electrical energy storage. There was a project on using vegetated green infrastructure to mitigate urban microclimates, a project on the culture of creating cultures of sustainability in the communities, the lived communities in the sustainable city. There's also a project on compost and organic residues, and then the final project is Giovanni's, Dr. Ciceli's project on mobility and travel. So SRTP, the Sustainability Research and Training Program, started out actually as a contract between University of California, Davis and Diamond Developers. At the time, I urged our UC Davis team, which include then Chancellor Linda Katehi and my co-PI, Brian Jenkins, to invite our partner universities in the University of California Davis Arab Region Consortium to join us in the research. Chancellor Katehi and Professor Jenkins agreed, and we made a requirement that each proposal that was submitted for funding would have at least one of UCDAR partners involved in the research. So just a little background on UCDAR then. UCDAR is the University of California Arab Region Consortium. It was founded in 2001, so we've been working for 20 years. I was at the time the University of California Education Abroad representative at the American University in Cairo, and I asked permission to develop collaborative projects and collaborative relations with regional universities as part of my mandate in that education abroad position. The UC agreed to that, and we actually had our first meeting of what became UCDAR in Beirut in 2001, co-hosted by the American University of Beirut and the Lebanese American University, and attended by faculty, by the provosts, chancellors, presidents of those universities, in addition to the American University in Cairo, and a leadership team from 4 of the University of California campuses. So we had about 60 faculty there, and we spent 2 full days brainstorming collaborative projects. Birzeit University of Palestine joined the consortium in 2004, and the American University of Sharjah in the UAE joined in 2012. In 2007, when then Chancellor Larry Vanderhoof visited Egypt for a full week, we arranged a full day meeting of the presidents, chancellors, administrative leadership deans and provosts, as well as about 70 faculty from the by then 5 university members. And we spent considerable time developing new collaborations. There were further meetings of that leadership level of presidents, chancellors, provosts, and deans in 2014 and 2015, both held in Dubai and both hosted by Diamond developers. So let me now switch to UCDAR, and and I want to show you a little bit about UCDAR, and I think the URL is in the chat. The main mission of UCDAR, the University of California Davis Arab Region Consortium, is to facilitate collaborative projects across all disciplines. And we have 20 years of history of all different kinds of projects, but those are the current ones. Gendering STEM education, mapping the production of knowledge on women and gender in the Arab region, resilience projects. There's actually 5 projects under the resilient projects have to do with urban space and archaeological projects and community development. The water, energy, food nexus project, transforming refugee mental health. We also have lecture series. So there's quite a few, and then SRTP is one of the projects. So the UCDAR has ongoing projects above and beyond the SRT projects, and I invite you to explore. We try to put upcoming events, reports from events, as well as all the members' contact information if you want to contact any of the scholars involved with any of these projects. UCDAR is run by an executive committee appointed by the presidents and chancellors of the 6 partners. I've been the director from the founding of the consortium and the chair of the executive committee. And just to give you a sense of how the research projects were selected for SRTP, they were reviewed by a subcommittee of the executive committee of UCDAR with additional faculty added as needed. The committee ranked the applications that came in and sent our nominations and rankings to Diamond developers. Diamond developers made the ultimate decisions, and their decisions were sometimes different from the committee's ranking because they were looking specifically at immediate needs for developing the sustainable city. So we have here a bringing together of 2 projects, SRTP and UCDAR. UC Davis has had a very long relationship with Diamond developers. I first met Faris Said in 2004 or 5 on a conference trip to Dubai. We immediately began discussing possible collaborations between Diamond developers and UC Davis. And every single time I went to Dubai, which was almost annually, After that, we would meet and talk about where can we collaborate. At the time, Ferris's work was focused primarily on recycling, waste management. In 2010, after many years of talking about mutual collaborations and possibilities for working together, I invited Ferris to UC Davis to meet researchers related to the work he was doing at that time, waste management. Chancellor Linda Kattei had just joined UC Davis and was in the midst of developing the blueprints for UC Davis's West Village, at that time the largest zero net energy use community in the United States. She invited Ferris to review the blueprints for West Village and invited the planners of West Village to discuss the plans with him. And that inspired Ferris. It was really the planning and the blueprints for West Village that inspired Ferris' interest to go back and think through developing the sustainable city. 2 years later, in 2010, we invited Ferris back to UC Davis. At that time, he had plans with him for the sustainable city, which went way beyond anything we had accomplished in West Village. And it was really quite startling to see the visionary planning for the sustainable city. Very exciting to see what has actually materialized from that vision planning as well. Chancellor Kattei made available her West Village leadership team so they could learn from mistakes we'd made, successes. We organized for him several days of meetings with leading scholars, planners, and administrators, and we discussed research that UC Davis might possibly be able to carry out to support the development of the sustainable city as it was being conceptualized and built out. That was in 2012. On his second trip, 2 years of discussions later, the SRTP was planned. That is in 2014, took 2 years of discussions and thinking through what we wanted to do. By 2014, the agreement was signed and we launched the beginning of the research. And we brought the UC DAR consortium into the research from the very first round. After the research funds were all allocated, we set aside a sum of money to plan a symposium so that we could bring together leading researchers around sustainability, sustainability activists, government policymakers, planners, and private sector leaders. We held that conference on January 24th of this year, attended by something like 75 activists, scholars, government planners, and private sector leaders. And here I will segue to my colleague and co-planner of the symposium, Professor Steve Wheeler, who will share with you what we discussed and what we learned at this conference. So turning it over to you, Steve, unless Giovanni wants to make a transition.
Let's go with Steve.
Okay. My name is Steve Wheeler. I'm a professor in the Department of Human Ecology at UC Davis. Thank you for inviting me, Giovanni. We are going to get to the very important transportation research in just a minute, but my job here in 5 minutes or less is to set the context of the sustainable city. This is one of maybe a dozen master planned communities worldwide that are not going to be just one-of-a-kind efforts, but are hopefully going to catalyze a shift globally towards more sustainable communities. And to think about how that will happen, we did convene this invited conference, which Suad just mentioned, in Davis in late January, just before the pandemic struck. And this was called the Next Generation of Sustainable Communities. So, and it was funded by the UC Davis Arab Region Consortium Sustainability Research and Training Program. We considered at this event 3 main types of sustainable community initiatives. One is the large master planned community, such as the sustainable city. The second is a more diffuse set of efforts to improve existing neighborhoods so as to upgrade their sustainability. And the third category were smaller scale examples, such as university campuses and smaller nonprofit developments. So the participants at this conference struggled to start with the difficulties that these developments face. It is not easy getting these things off the ground. The keynote speaker, Harrison Ford, former dean of the no, Harrison Fraker, sorry about that, former dean at the College of Environmental Design at UC Berkeley, spoke of moments of darkness that we face when we think about really trying to leverage a new generation of development. And many participants noted the disconnect between the urgent need for change and the slow pace of local government decision-making, public engagement, and on-the-ground development. Participants noted that we need a new model of growth, which is quite a bit different from business as usual. And many of them wondered whether local government or the public sector in general has the capacity needed to help catalyze this, and also whether the private sector or civil society have the necessary resources at the moment to get things going. So we did two types of brainstorming at this event. The first was to brainstorm challenges, which was very easy. The second was to brainstorm opportunities and strategies for more sustainable community development. In terms of the challenges, affordability definitely was something that many people raised. And this has transportation dimensions in addition to housing dimensions and other things. But it gets at the social dimension of sustainability, which is very important for us to keep in mind. Also, how to get stakeholders participating in development of communities, design of educational programs, for example, to reduce the amount that people drive, and to design the overall development, perhaps. Many participants noted the perverse incentives and regulations that are currently out there that developers and policymakers must work around. It is basically way easier to build conventional development or suburban sprawl development than sustainable infill development projects. There are many financial limitations, and then there is great institutional inertia in many cases. So those are some of the challenges that we noted will be faced by anybody worldwide trying to develop more sustainable neighborhoods. But we came up with some strategies that we thought at this event would be particularly useful. One of them is to emphasize not just attractive and affordable and livable housing, but attractive, affordable, livable, and sustainable communities. The holistic approach of how things fit together across the communities. And that very much includes the transportation dimensions, living locally perhaps, providing access to the things that people need rather than just ever expanding mobility. The second large-scale strategy that we highlighted at the Next Generation of Sustainable Community event was to make the case for public goods that in many cases the public sector will provide, such as public transit. Now following the pandemic, yes, we may need to rethink that, but certainly many forms of public transit will continue, and as well as bike and pedestrian facilities and many others. We highlighted a great need to clarify priorities. People often don't know what's most important to do, said one participant. Is it important for us to focus on banning plastics or particular types of technology with vehicles, or to focus on other things such as behavior change or bigger scale philosophical changes? And priorities, whenever we consider sustainability, need to be set early on and clarified often for many different stakeholders. Many participants in this event noted the need for higher level governments to help establish planning frameworks within which sustainable communities can come about, and particularly those that rely less on single occupant vehicles and very high levels of mobility and their associated greenhouse gas emissions and other things. Make it another strategy, make it easy for people to do the right thing and hard for them to do the wrong thing. This gets at the behavior change dimension, and we may hopefully hear more about that later. And lastly, panelist Andrew Hargadon noted the need to catalyze creative spirals of innovation. How do we get one good thing after another happening that will leverage further change? So these are sort of broad recommendations that came out of our January event. And then we did have some more specific transportation suggestions, including such things as fee baits, which would disincentivize polluting vehicles while incentivizing electric vehicles, mileage pricing for transportation, various changes to parking, in particular market rate charges and reductions in codes, car sharing strategies, and a number of participants did mention the need to consider gender and other dimensions of equity in the transportation field. So I think I am at my 5 minutes. I am going to end up there, but let's keep these bigger topics in mind as we think about specific lessons from transportation studies in these sustainable cities.
Thank you very much, Steve. There was a fantastic overview of all the great things that were discussed in this important meeting that was hosted in January, and also a lot of the discussions that are going on in the research and planning community about how to promote sustainability in the sustainable city and other type of similar sustainability-inspired development. And so with this, I will switch to talk about our project that we've been developing at UC Davis, focusing in particular on the mobility and sustainable city. So we heard quite a bit about the sustainable city. So the mobility in the sustainable city, this project was a project that was developed at UC Davis in our team to really focus about what were the travel patterns in the community and what actions could be made to further improve environmental sustainability of transportation. And as part of this project, we designed and administered 2 travel surveys that were launched in 2018 and 2019. And on top of that, we also analyzed a number of other data sources that were available from various sources. Our main interest in the project was to investigate the travel patterns of the residents and workers in the sustainable city. We also wanted to support the inventory of greenhouse gas emissions from transportation in the community, but also evaluate the responsiveness to new mobility options. And we will provide a couple of examples of areas in which we work in this area, and then provide sustainability-inspired recommendations for these and other communities. So I hope my screen is still showing. So the project, as we said, was funded for the UC Davis Sustainable Research and Training Program that was funded by the Dubai developers at UC Davis with the partner universities. In our case in particular, we work with the American University of Beirut in Lebanon with Professor Maya Abu Zaid was our partner in this project. And some of the reasons really for which we wanted to do active research in this area was that despite the UAE and Dubai being like an oil-based economy and also a development in an area where there is honestly a very difficult climate that doesn't really encourage people to walk and bike, and also there is scarcity of water, so many challenges. Still in the UAE and in Dubai in particular, there is a push today for innovation and sustainability. And the sustainable city is probably the best example of this, where they are really championing efforts to promote sustainability, but also in trying innovation in several areas, including transportation. And certainly, there were several challenges due to the location, due to the characteristics of the land use, but also many opportunities because of that. So just to give an overview about some challenges and opportunities in which we work, we operate in a climate that is extremely hot, and it's usually a big deterrent to active travel in particular. If you see on the left, pretty much the winter months in Dubai are more or less as hot as the month of June in Los Angeles, California, to give a sense of the temperature during the year. But also Dubai, over the past 20, 30 years, has largely developed with a low-density car-oriented development. And this is something that is outside of a community. So even the sustainable city needs to deal with this reality in which there is a network of freeways with very low-density development and car-dependent kind of society. But also Dubai has been promoting innovation, including big investments in shared, autonomous, and electric mobility. In the picture here, you can see one of the Easy Mile autonomous driverless vehicles that were tested in Dubai, and that's actually part of also the project of which we work with the pilot that was done in the community. So if we want to see the location of the sustainable city, we are really talking about the area which is called Dubai Land. So it's the area that is a pretty low density area in the inland of Dubai. And so we can see that, also some of the challenges in which we are operating. But to give an overview, of transportation in Dubai, let's look at some key mobility statistics. So in Dubai, in the last few years, there have been huge investments in public transportation. This has led to a brand new metro system, investments in bus, ferry, tram, light rail, taxi system, on-demand mobility, quite a bit of investments led by the Road and Transport Authority and also promoted in the city. At the same time, if we look at data from transportation, the modal split in the area is still predominantly car-oriented. 83% of the trips are actually made by private car. Public transportation is picking up quite a bit of trips, in particular to and from downtown Dubai and the coastal area, where there is the big metro area that is operating fairly nicely. But also the thing that is striking is the very low number of walking and bicycling trips. Less than 1% for both, really very few trips. And then the reason is also because the city and the region is really built over long distances with a low density. So operating in this area is not really easy to promote low carbon transportation. But let's look at what was done in the sustainable city. So as Karim was mentioning today, the sustainable city is really being designed with sustainability in design elements. So it's a mixed-use facility. It has a mix of villas and apartments, but also quite a bit of office, retail, restaurant space. There is a local school, a nursery, the conference center being built, healthcare facilities. So quite a bit of mixed-use facilities with also efforts that have been made to minimize distances between these local retail and office facility and restaurants and so on with the area where the residents live. Massive use of solar energy and a lot of other actions made to incorporate sustainability in a lot of the other parts of the sustainable city. Now, if we look into transportation, how has sustainability been declined in the sustainable city? So first of all, the sustainable city is pretty unique in Dubai because inside the community, you cannot travel by car. The community is a only walk and bicycling community. There are EV buggies that can be used. These EV buggies provide access to transportation with clean transportation with solar power energy. So the transportation inside the sustainable city is pretty much sustainable. Quite a bit of walking, bicycling, active travel, healthy lifestyle. However, once we go outside the community, we start getting problems. As I was saying, the location is in the Dubai Land, and that really doesn't help. So if we see, for instance, transportation to and from the neighboring communities, this is an example. The picture here on the right is from the Arabian Ranches 2, which is a neighboring community, very short distance from the sustainable city. And this community is actually reachable mainly by car. It could be a very, very short trip to get there. But the problem is that there is no safe walk and bike connection. This is Dubai. And the main way to get there is to take the motorway. And so a trip that would take only a few minutes walking, if somebody is willing to walk next to a motorway with a lot of cars, can become much longer if actually considered the need to use a car, in particular because of the presence of the dividing motorway that on the way back makes a 10-minute trip or 7-minute trip, make it become a 6-kilometer plus trip by car, taking the motorway, getting out on the next exit, and coming back to the sustainable city. So these are some of the challenges with which we have been operating in the sustainable city. Now, if we look also moving by public transportation, going to downtown Dubai from the sustainable city takes about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the traffic conditions. But if somebody wants to take transit, it will take more than double that. There is the need to make a connection, a transfer. So there is a direct bus serving the community, but then the bus takes to the Mall of the Emirates. We need to transfer to metro, and somehow the trip becomes much longer. No surprise, very few people are using public transportation in the sustainable city. In this scenario, we really wanted to study all the efforts that have been made, study how people are behaving, and given these conditions, because we cannot operate in an ideal world, we need to operate in the real world, see what we can do actually to promote a culture of sustainability and reduce greenhouse gas emissions for this community. So as part of this project, we developed a data collection that was done with 2 waves of surveys. One was done in 2018, one in 2019. The surveys were taken between 25 and 30 minutes and including several different survey sections, collecting quite a bit of information on several different areas. Our survey respondents were somehow a picture of the residents of the sustainable city. They were predominantly expats. A lot of them were non-Emirati, even more than in Dubai population, as you can see in the third column there. About 90% of the residents in Dubai are non-Emirati. In our survey, pretty much almost everybody was non-Emirati, which is actually not unusual because a very large majority of the people that live in the sustainable city are actually expats from other countries. The population is not as young as the general population in Dubai. This is also because of the cost of living in the community, but also they are very well educated. So it's really the category of well-educated international professionals, which are very common in the Dubai society. When we look at the way people travel, well, we see that pretty much if you look at the travel patterns inside the community, the goals of sustainability are really being largely achieved in the community. Pretty much everybody walks, rides a bicycle. They use an EV buggy, which actually, as I said before, they are powered by solar energy. So we can say that the goals of sustainability are really achieved 100% inside the community. When we go outside of the community and people that commute to other places, not surprisingly, given the situation that we were describing with the presence of a car-dependent society and so on, most of the trips that were happening by car. So as I was mentioning, in the previous slide, so we had basically the travel inside the community is pretty much already happening with zero emission modes, with walking, bicycling, a lot of use of the EV buggies, which are powered by solar energy. So pretty much good type of transportation options. When we look at the commuting trips, with a lot of them that happen outside of the community, really because of the land use and the transportation options that are available, most people rely on the use of a private car. Some trips made by taxis, some trips made by walking only for the local workers and the people inside the community, so people that are local commuters. When we look at the neighboring communities, we start seeing that some people, they dare to walk or bike, but really the car starts to dominate. And when we get to longer trips outside of the community, really solo trips made by car, they really have a large percentage and large role. So somehow this is an overview of what is happening today. But let's look at who are the users that live in a sustainable city. So when we look at individual attitudes toward the environmental mobility, we see that despite of the situation in which many people don't have many choices and they need to use a car, in a lot of cases, they actually really care about the environment and they are willing to make efforts to reduce their energy consumption, to have more sustainable options, to try to do things that are actually more sustainable. The problem is that in most cases, there are no reasonable alternatives to using a car. And so in this project, we really try to focus on what can we do given the situation. People like the sustainable living, they like share modes, they are willing to do more to join sustainable programs. And so in this project, we actually explored several different options. One of these was, for instance, to see who would be interested in switching to alternative fuel vehicles. We start with a situation where 80% of the local residents don't want to change the total number of vehicles in the household, but about half of them are interested in alternative fuel vehicles. And so very few will give away a car, but many of these could switch to driving electric vehicles. So huge potential for improvement and decarbonization of transportation could come from here. If we look like, what are the barriers to this? Well, pretty much the main barrier is the cost of purchasing. In the sustainable city and in Dubai, only a limited number of models of electric vehicles have been available in the past few years. They are increasing. The Model 3 has become available. We have more options now. So this is becoming a better availability condition. But so far, the cost was really the main barrier. Everything else was not a major barrier. In the UAE, distances that people travel usually are perfectly compatible with an electric vehicle range. Difficulty charging, not a barrier. Pretty much everybody can charge at home easily in the sustainable city. And there is solar energy, zero carbon. So there are a lot of opportunities to do that. There is also a matter of knowledge. So in the sustainable city, there was a test drive that was organized in collaboration with Tesla. And local residents and workers could test drive a Tesla. And as part of this project, we were looking at how the perception of EVs changed after test driving a Tesla. And we can see that overall opinion and perception, even of those that were not really excited about an EV, after they test drove it once, incredibly higher. So somehow it's a matter of awareness, availability, but also knowledge about the product. And making them more accessible and having more test drive and more opportunities can really increase the characteristics, the interest in the electric vehicle. We also work with the sustainable city as a shuttle pilot, with a driverless shuttle provided by the French company EasyMile, and a vehicle that was put in operation in the city and was launched as part of a pilot with the Dubai RTA. There was quite a bit of lessons learned with this. There was the need for modification of the infrastructure. There was actually some backlash from the TSC residents. The timing of the pilot was not perfect because it happened right after the time in which there was a death in Arizona from an autonomous vehicle. And so some issues, the main one of these was that for the safety of the local residents, the speed of the vehicle was really reduced to a level that would really make this vehicle be kind of slow. But anyway, if we look the opinion of the shuttle, there was no significant concerns with safety. It was operating at very low speed. But at the same time, the waiting time and the low speed was brought, not really at a major, advantage for this technology. But other things, like what Ali will talk in a little bit, could be actually bigger markets to reduce greenhouse gas emission in the community, in particular when we come to car sharing. Ali, do you want to pick up from here to talk about the work we did to analyze the greenhouse gas inventory in the sustainable city?
Yeah. Thank you, Giovanni. I'll take it up from here. I'll discuss a bit about GHG emissions that come from the community, because it's the sustainable city prides itself on the component of sustainability. A good metric to measure sustainability is using greenhouse gas emissions from the entire community. And so it goes that the sustainable city maintains a greenhouse gas inventory with the objective of that if they can be transparent and it can be verified by any agency. So they follow the global protocol for community scale greenhouse gas emission inventories and create an inventory of GHG emissions every year. So what is this protocol all about? Well, it accounts for emissions that come out from, say, a community, a city, it can be even your household, and it does so at different levels. So you can think of it as scopes. The scope 1 is basically what happens within the boundary. So if you consider TSC, the 46 hectare development, as a community, as a geographic entity, then the boundary of it and everything that happens inside is the scope 1. But as we know, not everything is consumed, like the energy that is consumed inside the community, or say the water that is consumed, is not the energy or the emissions that come out from that particular production that enables that activity. Take, for example, drinking water. The entire processing of water, the purification of it, happens at a third location. So that kind of comes in scope 2, grid supplied energy. And scope 3 is everything that is out of boundary. So if applying it to the aspect of transportation, there would be some transportation happening within the development, within the 46 hectares. And there would be scope 3 emissions, which I circle here in red, which is out of boundary transportation. So people would be commuting to their workplaces, they would be visiting different places across the city or maybe internationally, and that would also be accounted for in the GHG emissions. Now, since TSE develops this every year, they have already considered some kind of transportation emissions. And what basically goes into the GHG emission inventory based on the Kyoto Protocol are the 4 gases. So CO2, CH4 methane, nitrous oxides, and HFCs. So let's quickly go into what was the last inventory and what were the numbers that came out of it. So on the right, you can see total GHG emissions from all sources. This is for the sustainable community. And as you see, transportation over here is a tiny sliver. It's only at 7%. And why is it so small, you may ask? Well, it is so because the scope 3 emissions, as I mentioned earlier, that is out of boundary transportation, were not accounted for. So using the data that we collected in 2018 and 2019, we could get to numbers and try to account for the scope 3 emissions, which would give us a clearer picture of how much does transportation really contribute to the total GHG emissions for a TSE household or the entire community at large. In order to do that, we had 2 data points that we had collected in the data. We had multiple data points that could be used, but 2 particular data points were related to how many miles or kilometers does an average TSE driver drive weekly, and then we could get the annual numbers out of it. That's mentioned here. In 14,300 kilometers is the average mileage from a car in TSE. And we also had asked them about the international trips that TSE residents make every year. Now we realized that, okay, they could be business as well as personal trips. So we asked them the numbers for those. And here I report the median values for those trips. Now, in order to account for the scope 3 emissions, we could very easily get emissions factor for the vehicles that were driven. Although we had the make and year of the models, getting an average number for the fleet in Dubai is a little difficult. It's not as easy as it is here in the States, where these numbers are very transparently reported and there's good research or literature around this. But I have used emissions factor from US EPA GHG inventories. And using emission factors for per mile or per kilometer that a car is driven, we were able to calculate what were the emissions from a driving car and what were the emissions from air travel for both medium haul and long haul trips. And instead of going much into the details of how I calculated them, here I illustrate how much those emissions amount to. So if you recall from the earlier slide, the total emissions in the entire community were 10,000, and 7% of it, which is about 700 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, was the contribution from GHG. Now that we have accounted for the transportation, external transportation, that is scope 3 emissions, which is the second and the third bar over here, we can see that the total amount now stands at 6,100 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, about 32% of which comes from transportation by car outside the community, and a majority of it, more than 60%, comes from international air travel. Now, that's the reason why I've marked this international air travel in a darker shade, is because that's little control that you can have. It's the highly expat community. You can expect that they would be making business and international trips. But transportation in and around Dubai, which is this yellowish bar over here, is one that we can focus and try to electrify or bring down the emissions from. Now, if you look at household emissions, and this goes back to the poll question that we had, per capita emissions from a US typical household, this is based on a study from Song et al. From 2009, peg the number at about transportation number at about 30%. So 30% of the total emissions from a US household are from transportation. And then there are other sources like housing, energy, services, and food. Now, if you look at sustainable city household, 38% comes from transportation. Earlier, the number was just 7%. So if we see energy and desalinated water, because in Dubai, most of the water, there's very limited fresh water sources, groundwater sources. Most of it comes from desalinated water. That takes up 8%, and 31% is energy. Some of it is waste, but a large portion now becomes transportation, because that's perhaps the most energy intensive activity. Now, if you compare those numbers across the world, USA per capita comes out to be 5.3. Dubai, through a study in 2014, we can see the per capita emissions are about 3.3 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And if you compare that to what we have in TSC, we are about at 2.2 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, these numbers are not directly comparable, although I have shared them here in a contrasting manner, because all of these inventories follow different protocols and the boundaries might be a little different, and also the years. So I did these numbers for 2019. We have numbers from Dubai for 2014, and then numbers for US are available only from 2009. And all of them actually account for GHG emissions, maybe at the economy level using an input-output method. Not all of them sort of trace the emissions from source like we do. So there will be differences, but you sort of get the idea that it is in the league, and it seems to be comparable to what we see in Dubai. And a large portion of it, as I show here, comes from international travel. Now, the second aspect, as Giovanni was mentioning, and as Karim shared about how the focus of sustainable mobility drives the entire transportation paradigm in the sustainable city, TSC wants to implement this EV car sharing program, and they had already procured this electric bolts. These are already available. And for this two-way station-based electric car sharing program that we designed, we tried to get some data from the choice experiment that we put into our service. And here I show what we actually ended up asking. So this is part of the survey. We are asking this question: which EV car sharing plan do you prefer? So this is a question that is posed to the survey respondents. In 2019 survey, this is what we asked, because Chevy Bolts were already procured. And on the left, you'll see monthly subscription fee, free hours per month, and price per additional hour. This is sort of what attributes are we asking people to give their responses on. So we are trying to develop a subscription plan which would have a subscription fee, free number of hours per month, and price per additional hour. And then we ask a follow-up question. We present two choices with different combinations of this. So say a plan would be 125 dirhams, 8 free hours, with a price per additional hour of 30, and then in comparison something else. And then those two plans were presented to the respondent, and a follow-up question was asked: would you become a member given your choice of car sharing plan is offered? Based on the responses, we were trying to able to estimate a model. This is a choice behavior model. For those who are not much interested in the numbers or what exactly did we do here, we basically figured out that people were interested, as we see here in a positive coefficient for the ASC plan, that they are interested in subscribing for the plan. They positively see the number of free hours. So if the number of free hours were higher in the plan, they would be more likely to subscribe. And of course, as we might expect, subscription fee and additional charge per hour, those are two aspects of the entire plan that bring negative utility to our respondents. If you were trying to estimate a willingness to pay, basically how much per hour would our respondents be willing to pay? On an average, it comes out to be 10.5 to 14 Emirati dirham, and that's about US dollars 3.4 to 3.8. Now, if you compare that to zip car in the US, the lowest zip car starts in Davis at least at 5.5. Here we see who is more likely to subscribe. We basically find out that women and TSC, people who have a TSC-centric routine, again, some women and some people who live and work in TSC are more likely to subscribe. People who have more kids in their household or more vehicles than there are drivers in the household, or who are older than the average TSC resident, are less likely to subscribe. Although only a negative, only the attitudinal score of people who sort of hated the CS car sharing program was found insignificant, because we had a relatively smaller sample size. And I'll basically wrap up with what sort of purposes can this car sharing service offer. So for the purposes of going for shopping or running errands, those we see here, people have a high likelihood, they say that they would be using it the most. The other two are a little less popular, go to a restaurant and pick up or drop off kids, because we sort of understand there would be a little more time sensitivity in picking up or dropping off kids. But because going for shopping or running errands is generally something that you have more flexibility with, people would like to use the car sharing program for those purposes. And if we do a simple comment analysis of what people said about the car sharing program, they all want a reliable service. And some of them had certain concerns about how much time would the card be available for. And if it would be available, would it be available for all the hours, or when it is idle, would it be paid or not? So that's largely what I have about GHG emissions and electric car sharing.
Thank you very much, Ali. And I know we are running a little bit beyond schedule, so I will try just to summarize about some lessons learned that we got in this project. Leaving, for all of you that have more questions, I invite you please to post your question in the Q&A feature in Zoom, so we can answer them in a few minutes now during the question and answer time. But also, I will have here some main thoughts that you should be able to see on the screen about some lessons learned in this project. Among, some of the topics that we said, so in Dubai, given the location in Dubai land in particular, in the sustainable city, we have to fight, with quite a bit of conditions that were due to the location in the long density surrounding of Dubai, that really didn't make it easy to promote sustainable transportation. So even if there were quite a bit of effort, for instance, with the public transportation system, you can see there the stop is actually equipped with the air conditioning to make it more comfortable. There are a lot of efforts to really promote public transportation, still very low ridership compared to the total number of trips. But the potential is there, because the potential is associated, for instance, also with the type of residents that live here, that are ready to commit to more environmental friendly lifestyles, and already inside the community, this is really a community that largely travels to zero carbon, with walking, bicycling, and photovoltaic powered EV buggies. So what could we do in the future? So we have seen from the analysis from Ali that a significant portion of the greenhouse gas emissions from transportation in the sustainable city are associated with driving. Of course, a larger portion goes with air travel, but we can do very little to change air travel emissions, apart from trying to force people to stay at home, as it happens during the pandemic now. But during regular time, it's difficult to do that. But the big portion associated with car travel, that could be something that could be reduced. How that could be done? With reducing car travel, or at least with switching to electric vehicles. And so if really people need to drive, better they do it with an electric vehicle. So as we've seen, with this, analysis, the situation is already a little bit better than the surrounding communities, but there is still potential to improve. A lot of experiments have been done in the sustainable city. Micromobility might arrive with more scooters. The driverless shuttle was already done an experiment. Car sharing, we think, will be really a viable option to potentially replace some second cars in the household, and more importantly, transfer travel that nowadays is happening on non-electric vehicles to shared EVs from the car sharing program. Also, moving forward for the future, there will be certainly importance to improve connections to and from the neighboring communities. This can be done with direct new bike and walk infrastructure. For instance, there are already discussions between the sustainable city and neighboring communities to open a direct path to connect them to the mall and grocery stores that are in the two areas, so people can flow more easily, also to bring kids to school and so on. But also there could be possibility to use some tactical approaches. For example, there is a right-of-way that has been reserved for transit in front of the community, but that metro line will not be built probably for another 10 years in Dubai. So maybe that space, while we wait for transit that might never come because really the density in that area does not justify a metro line in that area, maybe that space, that right-of-way could be reconverted temporarily to be used for bike lanes and protected infrastructure for walkers and pedestrians. Also, there is huge potential for technology. Smart charging is already coming to the sustainable city, and when combined with solar energy, can really optimize the energy use and the sustainability. Car sharing can be a huge opportunity, in particular if made attractive to new residents. We have seen in our study, there is some potential. Some residents are really interested in the car sharing, but also the potential to shed vehicles of current residents is rather low. Very few are reporting that they are willing to give away a second car. But new residents that come in the community might only buy one car per household, and when needed, they can use, instead of a second car that is privately owned, they could use the car sharing program. Certainly, there's also a lot of lessons learned that from this community could be applied to other communities. Already, the sustainable city is creating a second community in the UAE, where a lot of the lessons learned from this community can be applied there. Also, more systems can arrive there. Micromobility, for instance, with shared scooters could complement the offer of the other options. However, as discussed already with Karim and his team, there's also the need to consider life cycle impact. In this project so far, we were able only to give a brief summary today. We mainly focus on tailpipe emission, energy impact, but we didn't really focus on the life cycle of all the construction and production of these solutions. And that should be considered when evaluating really what it means to provide sustainability. And then there will be also possibility in the future to integrate services. So far has been providing several different types of services, but there is a vision to implement them as a mobility as a service and potentially bring new opportunities in that way, but also more need to bring jobs closer to residences, which is a huge problem in Dubai. The TSC can solve some part, but cannot solve the entire city, of course, but also the coordination of that, and also try to coordinate the goods delivery and the passenger transportation could actually be part of the key solution for the future. I will pause here, but I want to really give an acknowledgement to all the great colleagues that have been contributing to this study. In particular, Farzad Alemi was central to our group at UC Davis, now works for Google, but he was central to a lot of the research we've been doing. Susan Henny and Pat Mokhtarian in our research team, Maya Buzaid, professor at the American University of Beirut, and then Karim, team, and Sania have been great partners and provided a lot of support and data and help in all our research, and will continue to do so on the sustainable city side. And I want also to acknowledge, we mentioned the research funded by the Diamond developers for the SRTP program at UC Davis, but also the additional support that was provided by our partners in the Three Revolution Future Mobility program that allow us to do a lot of additional analysis and work. And I will pause here, but I will welcome you to check our website. We will post a lot more information with more details of findings, report from this project. And now we have a few minutes in which we can discuss, and Steve will moderate the discussion. And I really invite everybody to post your questions in the question and answer space in the Zoom application. Steve.
Okay, I am going to moderate Q&A. We just have about 10 minutes here. And I'm going to take the first question that appeared in our Q&A box from Bill Leahy. Please distinguish between mobility and accessibility in this context. People want access. Poor urban design requires mobility to provide access. Does this argue for converting cities, USA and elsewhere, to car-free cities? Would any of the panelists like to respond to that one?
Yes,
maybe I can take it. Oh, Karim, you want to go first?
Actually, I just wanted to say, absolutely. I mean, it is about access, regardless of technology. And how do we make mobility, including transportation, accessible to all people? I cannot speak to that from the vantage point of the sustainable city because it is not a primary concern. However, public transportation is something we were able to connect to within the sustainable city so that all staff, domestic staff, workers, laborers can actually access the sustainable city and go back to the city through bus and metro. But
okay.
This is so important in other contexts and other societies.
Yes, thank you, Karim. I'm going to respond very briefly to that also, since I talked about the broader picture. And this takes us to the need for a broader public sector framework of planning, which does make connections between isolated developments and does think about how public transit or other forms of alternative transportation link things. This also relates to a question from Muafe Shelat Masifi about how the new model of growth is achievable. And again, we need to think about a framework of development, including different levels of government and the private sector, such as the developers of these sustainable cities. Okay, moving on to technology questions. We had a couple different questions about technology, which I am going to refer to Karim. One was, what types of battery storage are being used in the sustainable city? And the other was whether hydrogen fuel cell or hydrogen storage is being considered. Can you respond to those, Karim?
Yes, and I will keep it brief. I actually responded offline, but I will explain that for now, the sustainable city is grid connected. So it's important in all these, every sustainable city potentially has a different use case. In our case, we are connected to the grid and we have the regulation in place for net metering. So surplus electricity is actually exported and it is credited to the account of the tenant. So no need for storage because the grid provides storage for now, as I said, because in the future, if they review or revise their rate structure, then there may be an incentive, off-peak and peak hours, then there may be an incentive to store electricity. Having said that, hydrogen fuel cells, so we still don't need it. However, we have been in discussions with Toyota. Toyota is, Japan hasn't really joined the lithium-ion bandwagon. They're jumping from hybrids to hydrogen fuel cells. This is still, I would say, a few years, if not a decade away, because of storage, because of infrastructure. So it is not something we will immediately need. Biogas is more interesting for us, and battery storage in the future.
Okay. We had a question, predictably, about COVID and whether that has impacted some of these trends and statistics in the sustainable city. I'm going to ask Giovanni or Ali if they can respond to that one. Or
yeah,
Karim also, why not?
Yeah, I will mention that, so the COVID-19 has certainly been impacting a lot the use of shared mobility and all mass transportation and all shared transportation options. The data that we collected here in Dubai were actually from before the pandemic. So they didn't really reflect the reduction in willingness to use car sharing systems or any type of shared mode of transportation. At UC Davis, we have a very broad research program that is currently evaluating the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic around the world in several different regions. So I would actually invite all interested attendees in the audience to visit the website post-COVID-19 mobility.ucdavis.edu. And maybe, Leon, you can post it in the chat box for all the participants. Back to the sustainable city, Karim can tell us actually how the situation was affecting with the sustainable city with the lockdown. Certainly, I would mention one thing. There has been some big temporary impacts, but also some long-lasting impacts are expected. And so somehow even the plan, for instance, to launch the car sharing program needs to be fine-tuned to the fact that there will be some lower inclination and some hesitation of respondents to really jump back to use share mode or sharing, like, facilities or vehicles with other participants. This needs to be considered. On the supply side, a lot of efforts need to be made to ensure that serious efforts are made to reduce the spread of the potential spread of the virus. But also on the demand side, there's also, like, a phased approach in planning things that probably will happen later on than planned, simply because there will be less demand, less interest in that, and also, like, probably might change attitudes of the respondents also in the medium longer term. And this is part of, actually, for the car sharing, part of the plan that we have been discussing with Karim also, to study pockets of demand, because some of the results that so far Ali was presenting were the average willingness to pay, for instance, among all residents, but certainly there will be the potential to do price discrimination, special offers, special plans to target specific segments of the potential users that might be more reactive and more sensitive to certain policies. Karim, you want to pick up and add something on the COVID-19?
I mean, briefly, during those 90 days or so of lockdown, like you in the US, in parts of the US, restricted movements, meaning people move less, right? So that's the first observation, mobility drops. When it comes to shared assets or club goods, people were a little bit hesitant because they need to sit in a buggy that was used by someone else. It's a shared commodity. And so we advise people to use, gloves temporarily and to disinfect at least the steering wheel and the windshield. But this is temporary, right? We need to see beyond. So when this anxiety begins to dissipate, I think we will be back to where we were before. And more importantly, I think now, because of the economic recession, which we're all feeling, now we need to talk about income, right? So the pandemic, future pandemics and shocks, they are slashing disposable income and reducing household income. So if mobility, shared mobility, can be pitched differently, and if it is pitched as a mean to cheaper mobility and transportation, then I think we're going to see a pickup in shared mobility if not in 2020, but in 2021. As for micro-mobility and biking, etc., you have to again remember low-density developments. We are 30 kilometers from central Dubai. You have to remember the climate as well. You're not going to expose yourself to heat. So we have those physical limitations, right? But we have to see beyond the pandemic and the behavior that we've been witnessing the past 90 days. And I think there's going to be an uptake in shared mobility.
Okay, I think we have just time for one or two more questions. I'm going to group them together. We have two questions about public transit, and I'm going to refer these to Karim. Zaran asks, is rail being considered in Dubai? And JB asks, did you consider mass transit improvements to the sustainable city in advance of metro rail? Curious about specifics. And then there are two other questions about individual incentives, about do you offer discounts for EV owners or pre-installed infrastructure for charging? And is there secure parking for my personal bicycle or e-bicycle? I know that's a lot. I'm sorry. Let's take the public transit first.
Yeah, public transit. Well, we're a developer, right? So I think we're one stakeholder in a long chain of stakeholders, and we need to work together to improve mobility across the city. So a developer, and by Dubai standards, we are a very small developer compared to the big names out there in the market. Having said that, then it's all about location. So where are we in Dubai? And as Giovanni showed you on the map, we're about 15 kilometers inland. The weather is drier. There's only one road which leads to us, and there was no bus, when the city was launched in 2016. So we had to lobby as a developer, myself included. We had to advocate with the Road and Transport Authority to extend a bus service. And that took about 9 months, and eventually the bus came, and then we had to demonstrate the commercial viability because there is a business case. Eventually, now it's solid. As for, and that connects us with the metro line, so bus metro linkage. As for the metro passing along the main road adjacent to the sustainable city, well, yes, we have a right of way, but it's still far away because I think the population density will not justify a metro investment for many, many, many years to come. As for EV, I had mentioned that EVs, from day one, Diamond Developers for early adopters, so the people who invested or purchased homes in 2014, 15, and 16, they had a clause in their sales agreement, in their SPA, that they would receive a subsidy up to $10,000 towards the purchase of an electric vehicle. But you need to avail that benefit, you need to purchase the car. So most people did not purchase the car. I believe less than 10 families actually benefited, and now we see their EVs in the community. But that is something easy for a developer to do, any developer who is into master planning communities or master plan communities. The infrastructure we deployed in 2016, but now 5 years on, we realize we have to modernize it. As we see EVs increase, along with EV uptake, you really have to anticipate and be ready for the load imbalance. Those are massive, massive batteries, right? A single car can power 2 or 3 homes. So we need better infrastructure in place. So what we have 5 years ago, in my view, is obsolete today. We need smart charging and load balancing. Is it free? Yes, the electricity is free on 2 counts for now. You get a white card, it's called a green card, from the utility for free electric vehicle charging throughout Dubai, but also in the sustainable city, it is provided by the developer from the community account. So there are many benefits and incentives to driving EVs in Dubai. And now as the prices drop to, let's say, somewhere between $30,000 and $45,000, $50,000, it becomes more accessible.
Okay, I think we are about at the end of our time. Are we, Giovanni?
I was going to say, I think we already are a little bit past the 10:30 mark. So I really want to thank, first of all the panelists and Steve for moderating the debate, Karim and Suad, actually, that I don't see connected online. Probably she's having connection issues too in connecting through the internet. But I really want to thank Karim, Suad, Steve, Ali, and all the attendees that have joined us today for this webinar. I apologize again if we had some technical issues with the connection, but I'm happy we went through this webinar also with all the presentation that we planned. I also would mention that the recording of the webinar and all presentations will be available after this webinar, so everybody can check the material again online. And with this, I would like to thank everybody, and I think we can adjourn here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen.